President Trump is suing Britain's national broadcaster, the BBC, for $10 billion. He claims the world-renowned media company maliciously distorted a speech he made on January 6, 2021. So, who will win in this latest battle between the president and the press? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, it's seen as a bastion of editorial standards, but Britain's BBC is under scrutiny after misrepresenting a speech by the US President Donald Trump. Despite apologising, Trump is suing the corporation for billions of dollars. He's brought similar cases against American broadcasters CBS and ABC.
I'm suing the BBC for putting words in my mouth, literally. They put words in my mouth. They had me saying things that I never said.
Britain's BBC says it will fight back against a multi-billion-dollar defamation lawsuit filed against it by Donald Trump. The US president's legal team claimed the UK's national broadcaster intentionally and maliciously sought to fully mislead its viewers in its edit of a speech from the 6th of January 2021, making it appear that Trump encouraged people to riot at the US Capitol.
We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol and we fight. We fight like hell. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol and we fight. We fight like hell. And if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore.
Few are defending the misleading edit, even the BBC themselves, who have apologised for the serious editorial error. What is now in debate is whether it was done on purpose and what damage it may have caused to Mr. Trump. The BBC can push back on the two main points of the case. Team Trump would have to prove that enough American voters saw the re-airing of the clip ahead of the 2024 election to have an effect, and that the corporation had deliberately set out to maliciously defame him. Left-wing British politicians are backing the corporation, viewing the case as political.
I think this was a bit unexpected, that this is a TV programme that when it was shown in 2024, there was zero complaints. And then for various reasons, people who I feel want to discredit the BBC, not necessarily the originator being Trump, but people in this country, people on the BBC board even, who are politically right-wing, who want to move to a more pay-per-view model. I do feel it's a dangerous moment because the sums of money are so enormous. The BBC's had reducing budgets. We need to look at a stable financial settlement for it.
The scandal has already led to the resignation of two big BBC bosses and prompted both internal and external investigations. But that has failed to get Trump to back down, so the BBC is now planning to fight back, filing a motion to dismiss the claims, arguing a Floridian court has no jurisdiction over a British broadcaster. The war between an establishment institution and an unorthodox US president continues.
Well, let's meet our guests for this one. Joining us from Washington, D.C., we have Jim Trusty, the lawyer who represented President Trump in his defamation lawsuit against CNN. Here in the studio, I'm delighted to say we have the former Press Association court reporter Sian Harrison and the political broadcaster and former BBC journalist Michael Crick. You're all very welcome to this roundtable. Jim, to you, you've worked with the president, you've worked for the president. What's he like to deal with as a lawyer?
Well, he's pretty much the same guy behind the scenes. I used to say he's the same guy, but he cussed more. But now he cusses pretty openly, too. So I don't know. But look, anytime you're representing somebody who's in a, executive position, as they call a C-suite, white-collar type defendant, they have a real adjustment to make. They're not used to having their fates in the hands of lawyers. So it can be very challenging. And here, when I was representing President Trump, it was, he's a former president and he was making a run at becoming a president once again. So the scrutiny that comes with it makes it a pretty pressure-filled job, but not unlike a lot of, white-collar C-suite executives.
And Jim, did you feel that pressure?
Yeah, I mean, look at me. I'm 22 years old, and no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, like you feel the pressure, but you feel the pressure for any client. I mean, you want to serve your client well. The difference here was you certainly had a very strong personality, had a lot of people around him with opinions, and then you just had a ton of scrutiny when things were above water, where where they were visible to the public. Everyone and their mother had an opinion about how you were doing as an attorney, what strategy you were employing, whether he was guilty of crimes or not. So the spotlight is certainly a lot brighter in a situation where you're representing President Trump, but it's not a really inconsistent pressure with what you feel for any client.
Thanks, Jim. Sian, let's look at the mistake the BBC made. They held their hands up, they've apologised. Just journalistically, how bad was it?
I think it's a pretty terrible mistake to have made, and we're still not sure how it was made, because obviously there should have been huge checks upon checks on something like that, and a simple flash or cutaway between those two statements, which were from either end of the speech, would have, made this problem not exist. So it's a really sort of fundamental, basic error, and it's very difficult to see how it was made.
Michael, to you, how was that mistake made? Do you think it was willfully done, or was it just something that slipped through an edit suite, should have been caught, should have been spotted by a boss?
I don't know. I mean, I've inquired of my friends and in the BBC and former BBC people. Nobody can work it out. Nobody condones it. It was a terrible mistake. It's possible that it was some video editor just told to get a few clips of Trump's speech together and put them in a line, and we'll choose them. But it should have been stopped, as Sian says, by somebody in an executive position. It was a fairly simple programme, that, and it may well be that the lawyers and the executive producers were so diverted by more complicated programmes at the time that they didn't watch as closely as they should have done. That's a possibility, but who knows?
And Sian, where does this leave the BBC now reputationally, when you've got a fight with the most high-profile man on earth and he is not someone to back down?
I think the reputation's already taken a huge knock. That they've lost two of the most senior people. The real problem that they face going forward is that they're involved in big stakes litigation now, and they're under the spotlight. And this will be hugely costly, even in the event that they win, because defending a litigation like this is very expensive.
Thank you. Jim, just tell us why he filed in Miami. What's behind that?
Well, federal venue for civil cases is pretty generous. So you do have some options in terms of where you're going to file. And here, because he lives in the Southern District of Florida, that's a very logical place for him to file. He can say, this affected me as I, sat at my home at Mar-a-Lago. So it's a venue that's not automatically friendly to President Trump, but it's a far cry from litigating in Washington, D.C. or New York, where things are decidedly hostile. So they had some options. This was a logical one. There's some convenience to it in the fact that you're dealing with a judge who's, somewhere within 30 miles of his home. And that's a pretty predictable and smart move to be filing it in South Florida rather than somewhere else in the U.S.
Jim, let's be frank here. Do you seriously think anyone in the United States was swayed to vote in a different way, even if they watched that documentary?
Well, I mean, maybe not many, but that's also kind of a red herring legally. I mean, that could affect the damages component where eventually people are saying, look, there was no real harm here, from what you guys, I think, are very optimistically calling a mistake. And look, at the end of the day, that doesn't change the liability factor, which is, did BBC essentially display a hostility, or what they would call malice under U.S. case law, really towards the truth? I mean, people think of it as malice towards a public figure, meaning President Trump, but it's really about how intentional the behavior was. And the issue there, and the reason we can't say with certainty whether it's some sort of mistake or oversight or something a little more affirmative by way of bias, is that we're not anywhere close to discovery yet. The discovery process is when the plaintiff's attorneys for President Trump would look for those internal communications, those checks that either happened or didn't happen, and see what type of communications were in there. That tends to be the smoking gun in these cases where somebody says, yeah, go ahead and, meld those two clips together. That's perfect.
Should the BBC settle with Trump?
Yeah, they should, I mean, the reality is, generally speaking, defamation cases are hard when the plaintiff is a public figure, and obviously President Trump is, exhibit A for public figure. But when you have these discrete incidents of doctoring, of with something that looks pretty malicious in terms of taking known information and distorting it for the viewer, particularly if there's things in discovery that are going to hurt, that's the type of thing where you might want to pony up. I mean, obviously they've had some high profile resignations over it, but that doesn't really stop the civil litigation train. So yeah, I think under U.S. case law, they're in a bad spot, just like ABC and CBS faced.
Thanks, Jim.
The trouble is with this, that we're not dealing with much more important issues here, and that is the conflict of interest. And we in Britain have a convention that ministers and prime ministers don't sue because, and what we've seen in America is the possibility that CBS paid up, coughed up, because they were frightened at the fact that Trump and the FCC, when he nominates the members of the FCC, would have decided adversely against them in terms of their business interests. And that is very, very serious. And that's why the convention applies in Britain. And that's why Trump shouldn't be suing. He should take it like a man. He should accept that as a president, he's bound to be the subject of mistakes occasionally, satire, criticism, and deal with it after when he's left office if necessary. But Michael, that conflict's really important.
But Michael, that was the worst possible way of splicing together two ends of a speech.
It may well have been. But I mean, the BBC is already affected by this. The BBC has told its journalists. There was a wreath lecture last month given by a Dutch historian who said that, in his view, Trump was the most openly corrupt president in US history. That was taken out of the wreath lecture because the BBC were frightened, and the BBC journalists were told they could not use that quote anywhere else. And yet many historians would legitimately agree with that Trump is the most openly corrupt president in US history. Many would not. Now, so legitimate debate is being stifled here through the fear of litigation, through the fear, perhaps in the BBC case, that Trump and the FCC will limit the BBC's ambitions to expand in North America.
Thank you, Michael. Sian, to you, how difficult and unpalatable is it from a British perspective, given that the BBC is funded by taxpayers via a licence fee everyone has to pay? So anyone watching on an international platform here, if you watch TV in the UK, you pay a licence fee to the BBC, even if you don't watch the BBC. How difficult is it for British people to think that their money could be going to President Trump?
Well, I've listened to some debates on this, and some people have, stated that they'd be absolutely appalled and that they're actually thinking of not paying their licence fee because of this case. So, and that would leave the BBC in a really desperate position. I mean, we've got the licence, the whole charter coming up for discussion, and the government is already, looking at ways that the BBC might be funded in future, different models. So this is really integral to the survival of the BBC. If suddenly everyone starts deciding they're not going to pay their licence fee, and it would also potentially impact on our court system, because you would have people being fined left, right, and centre for that. So I think it is something that is unpalatable to a lot of people.
Michael, you talk to colleagues at the BBC on a weekly basis, I'm guessing. What's the mood like? What has it done to morale there?
Well, it's not helped morale, but there is also a determination within the BBC to fight this case, not just on behalf of the BBC, but on behalf of journalists everywhere, globally. And frankly, if I was a BBC journalist right now, I would be organising amongst all my colleagues a counterclaim for $11 billion for Trump calling BBC journalists corrupt. The only way to deal with bullies in this world, and Trump is without doubt a bully, the only way to deal with bullies is to bully them back, to stand up to them, and make it clear you're not going to be pushed around in the way that CBS and ABC were. I mean, CBS, in settling, there've been strong suspicions in the United States and allegations that effectively they were paying a bribe to Trump through his legal action in order to make sure that he didn't adversely affect their business interests. This is serious stuff here.
Jim, to you, what do you make of the allegation there that your president is a bully, throwing his weight around silencing the media. What do you say to that?
I mean, look, he's a strong personality, don't get me wrong. But at the end of the day, what I'm hearing is the media saying the media is a victim when they engage in defamation. I mean, woe is me, cries BBC and their friends. Let's countersue. Let's call him a bully. Look, this is a problem of BBC's own making. And I'm sorry, but if you doctor footage to try to make somebody look bad, you can't be surprised when they decide to fight back. And if you want to man up and always say, just take it like a man, well, then that's just free license for the media in the US and elsewhere, and in this case, BBC, to just run roughshod over the truth and be propaganda outlets. So, look, it's a weird world when your president's involved in litigation all the time. And frankly, a lot of that's the lawfare that we've suffered through in recent years, where criminal justice was weaponized against him. On the civil side, it's a issue of time as well. You don't want a sitting president having to worry about litigation while they're running a country. But at the end of the day, it's his choice. If he wants to make a point that BBC in this instance is acting just like CBS and ABC and doctoring and misleading the viewers, then he's got a right to go after it.
Jim, I watched that movie recently, The Apprentice, where it was quite clear he was heavily influenced as he began his kind of public life by the lawyer Roy Cohen. I'm sure you've seen it and you know who I'm talking about. And there are several scenes in that film where Cohen tells him to slap in a lawsuit, fight back, never ever admit defeat. How influenced is his thinking by that relationship with Roy Cohen back in the day?
Yeah, I think it's influenced. I don't think it's something that's kind of omnipresent. But Cohen, the things he takes away from his relationship with Roy Cohen back in the day is to have a real bare-knuckled street fighter type lawyer with undoubtable loyalty to the client. And this was in kind of the rough and tumble world of New York real estate, where everybody was suing each other and their mother every day. So I think he did take some lessons away in terms of loyalty and kind of bare knuckle brawling type legal representation. But keep in mind, as you know from watching that, Roy Cohen died probably from AIDS, died penniless, owing the IRS millions of dollars, and died disbarred. So he's not exactly my role model in terms of my career trajectory. But I think President Trump took away at least some lessons from those years with him as his lawyer.
Thanks, Jim. Sian, to you, for Keir Starmer, how awkward is this, trying to build a relationship with the United States, the Trump administration, the state visit back in September? Keir Starmer must be kind of really privately frustrated.
I mean, I can't speak for the private thoughts of Keir Starmer, but I would say this is a really difficult, it's an additional difficult feature for the government, which has to tread a very careful path through diplomacy. There are obviously active situations around the world that we're involved in, including Ukraine. And yeah, it's, we know that we keep hearing about the special relationship. It's very important. The US is one of our important allies and partners. So it's incredibly difficult, I think, for the government to really be involved in this. And, the BBC is independent from the government, so it gives them a bit of arm's length. But at some point, you would expect the government to maybe stand up for the public broadcaster. It's just, I think it's a really unenviable position that they're in.
Michael, just come in on that. Starmer must be seething.
Well, it's a problem for him, and I hope that privately he's telling the BBC to stand up to Trump. But the Venezuela situation is a far bigger headache for Starmer, given Starmer's past as an international human rights lawyer.
Jim, to you, you said earlier on that the BBC should settle. What do you think would be acceptable to President Trump?
Oh, I have no idea, no inside information there. I mean, look, it's certainly not the top of the price tag, but time kind of works against reasonable settlement. So the longer they drag it out, the more risk they have that the plaintiff's attorneys, come off as pretty greedy. I think the pivotal internal decision for BBC is, what did their internal investigation show up? After they found out about the problem, after they got, the shot across the bow that they were going to be sued, usually the attorneys would then run and try to interview people and look at internal communications and figure out how bad the situation really is. If there are any smoking guns behind the scenes by way of text messages, emails, signal to communications, whatever, or a whistleblower, anything like that, really alters the scale and makes it a quick settlement type case. If it's clean, on the other hand, if it just looks like, gosh, they just overlooked this speech and made a mistake, then they can decide either because of that or because of some principle that they want to fight it. But they do risk the price tag going up exponentially over time. So now's the time you could probably settle, in the singles of millions would be my best guess, with a big heartfelt apology and be done with it. Or you can, sink it into the litigation costs and have a long drawn out fight, but risk an awful lot on the back end.
Jim, how is the BBC viewed by the American public? We know they make a lot of content, a lot of documentaries away from the news side of things. How does the American public view the BBC's reputation?
Yeah, I can't speak for the whole US public on that. I would say, I think a lot of people turn to BBC because of foreign coverage. I mean, we always feel like there's a little bit of a deficit on the US side of actual coverage. And I don't even mean just Europe, but all around the world. We tend to be a little too introspective with our daily news, a little too much of the street fights that are happening within the US. And so I think people look to it not necessarily as a full-time source of all their news, but when they really feel starved about what's happening, in the UK, what's happening in, Nigeria, what's happening in Ukraine, Russia, you get better detail, better depth from some of the BBC reporting than you do a lot of the outlets here, I think.
Thanks, Jim. Sian, what will this impact be on journalism in the BBC going forward? Because I would imagine there will be far more scrutiny of documentaries and editing processes.
Yes, well, I mean, there certainly should be, at least. I would hope that and expect that there would be internal memos galore and that there would be serious scrutiny of everything. I mean, they have a really strong legal team. So it, like Michael said, and like I said before, it's very difficult to see how this could have got through. And, I think there just needs to be really robust checks and balances in place.
Michael, your reading of where the BBC goes from here?
Well, it'll fight the case. And Mr. Trusty points out that the discovery process may show at what level this decision was made. And of course, the higher up it is, the more embarrassing it is to the BBC. But of course, there's the counter-discovery process as well, as to what actually happened on January the 6th and what Trump was saying and all of that, details which may not have come out in the American processes so far. So it could be quite an interesting battle. But I hope the BBC lawyers take note of the way in which Mr. Trusty has made it quite clear he thinks the 10 billion figure is way over the top and that the settlement really ought to be a few billion.
And Michael, just in terms of names that have fallen by the wayside here because of this issue, Tim Davie, Director General of the BBC, gone. Deborah Turness, she was the boss of the news side of things at the BBC, gone. This has cost two people their BBC careers.
It has, although in both cases, there was a string of other incidents and other problems, many of which were documented in a document that was published in the Daily Telegraph a few months ago. But this is the biggest of all. And of course, in a situation where two figures of that stature have gone, it's very difficult. Though Mr. Davies is still running the show, but if you're telling people you're off, then you're a bit of a lame duck. So it's problematic. But I wish them well, because the BBC is one of the things that is great about this country. And as Mr. Trusty, I think, acknowledged, far better in our journalistic work than American broadcasters.
Well, Jim, on that point, you've had great success with the president, in your defamation case against CNN. He has also won significant damages against ABC and CBS. Do you think a victory for Trump in the small single-digit millions here would suffice with another apology?
Let me make it clear. I'm not negotiating his case right now. I'm on the outside.
But if you were.
Well, starting point, yeah, let's start with you paying off my lawyer fees. I mean, that's a good start. But no, I mean, look, I think that there's room for a settlement. I do think that there's value to resolution. There's value to early resolution, particularly if you're a sitting president. And so there is room to talk. But again, time is probably not on BBC's side. I mean, the longer it drags out, the more it's an issue in general and politically and financially, and the more likely that the sides kind of calcify and fight whether they should or shouldn't. So, yeah, again, if you know U.S. case law on defamation, it's these cases that involve a singular kind of move like this, as opposed to a thematic accusation. Oh, they always called Trump Hitler, right? That was actually the CNN case. And so when you have these kind of single moments where you can infer malicious intent on behalf of the broadcaster, that's a big ticket in the U.S. So there is some exposure here. They need to take it seriously. And again, there's value to early resolution, I think, for both sides.
Jim, just one final point. Michael mentioned earlier on that British prime ministers and ministers do not sue. Do you think maybe President Trump might kind of take a look at the way the Brits do things and just think, wow, I need to kind of maybe change my ways perhaps and be less legally aggressive?
Well, I think he does feel there's a special relationship with the UK, and I think that's great. I think that's actually a little bit of a revival of spirit in the US compared to where we were years earlier. And so I do think he has respect. He likes to come over there and golf in Scotland. But whether anybody's going to change his mind on fighting bias in media, yeah, I wouldn't take that bet.
Jim Trusty, thank you, and to Michael Crick and Sian Harrison as well. Fascinating conversation. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye, and thank you for watching.